We can now create new items from our client app. The last feature we'll add in this module is to allow the editing of existing items. So the strategy will be to repurpose this form on the cell view so that it can either create or edit an item depending on how it's accessed. So if an item's ID is present in the URL, we're going to get that ID from the cell view, load the item data, and then we're going to pre-fill this form with the existing data. Then once the user has made the edits they want, the form gets saved, and instead of creating a new item, we're going to update it. Coming over to our router file, you'll see that I've set up a route exactly for this purpose. So this one is showing the cell view, but instead of having cell as the path, it's got items ID edit, where ID is a dynamic ID. Before we update our form to allow the editing of an item, let's add a button to the item page that an admin user can use to be linked to the edit page for that particular item. You'll recall from an earlier video that the Add to Cart button on our item page and our item component is conditionally shown if the item viewer is a regular user and not an admin user. So what I want to do is make a copy of this button, paste it underneath, and we're going to get rid of the VIF here, and we're going to change that to a VELSE. So in other words, if the viewer is an admin, they're going to see this button down here. The other thing we want to do is get rid of this click handler and actually bind to the to prop, which is available on the Vuetify V button. And what you can do is you can pass a path to that, and it will act as a hyperlink. So we want to put items ID edit there. Now obviously if we want to make this middle segment a dynamic ID, what we can do instead is change this into a template literal and replace the ID here with a variable. Now this component has the item available as a computed property, and that item has the item's ID as a subproperty, so we can pass in item ID there like that. Finally, we want to change the text child from add to cart to simply edit item. Coming over to the browser now, make sure you're logged in as an admin, and you should now see this edit button on the item page. So if you click that, you'll be on the cell view again, but now the URL is different. The form's not displaying correctly, but we'll fix that in a moment. In order to edit an item, we'll first need to load it from the API. Now we can do this in the created hook in the cell view here. Currently we're creating a new temporary item model here, but if we're editing an item though, we'd rather load the model than create one. So what we're going to do is we're first going to extract the item's ID by creating a new const ID, which we can get from deconstructing this route params like that. Next, let's check if ID is defined by putting it in this conditional. Now if it is, it means we're using this view to edit an item. So what we can do is go await item $get, and we can pass in an object now and put the first property as params and assign an object to that, and we'll have a subproperty of ID using the property value shorthand like that. Now note that because we're using await, we need to turn this into an async function. So you recall from the last module that the $get method here, that's going to get a specific item from the API and load it into the Vuex store. Now in the case that ID is not defined, we want to put an else block here, and we want to go ahead and move the create line into that else block. Something important to note is that the created hook is now asynchronous, and this means it won't necessarily be finished loading before our inputs load, meaning that when they render, they may attempt to bind to an item that doesn't yet exist. So we can solve this problem by using a route navigation guard instead of a created hook, since route navigation guards can prevent the route from being accessed and the component being rendered until the navigation process is completed. So let's convert created into before route enter, and that means we can give it new arguments to, from, and next. This will mean that we can also change this into a simpler to.params instead of this route. And it also means that we're going to have to call next at the end of the function. Now there's one last thing I'd like to change in this method, and that is to wrap this await call in a conditional. And the test is going to be not item find ID. So what does that mean? Well, the purpose is going to be to check if the item is already in the store, and if it is, to not load it off the API. And the reason that we'd want to do that is that if we get to the sell page via the item page, it means we've already loaded that item's data from the API, and there's no point in loading it again. Coming over to the item form component file now, we're going to need a slightly different submit handler if we're going to use this form to edit an item rather than create one. So in the send data method here, the first two lines that we've got still make sense. So we should begin by grabbing the ID and then trying to load the item from the Vuex store. After the second line though, let's insert a conditional, and we're going to check if the ID is equivalent to temp item ID. If it is, it means that we're creating a new item, and what we can do is move those lines inside there like that. If it isn't, we want to update an item. So to do that, we can use the Vuex ORM method item $update. Now we're going to pass an object into that, and the first property we want to be params, and we'll assign an object to that with ID using the value property shorthand, and the second property will be data, which can also be a value property shorthand because we already grabbed the data up here with item find. Coming to the browser now, if we go to an item and click edit, we're in the cell view, but if you look at the route, we've actually got the ID and edit up there, and the form's been pre-filled, so it looks like we're in business. If I change a value though, and then click save, you'll see that we end up on the 404 page. Looking at the console though, we can see why. You can see it's making a put call to our server. However, our item update endpoint actually requires a patch call, not a put, so we're going to have to fix that. So far, the Vuex ORM Axios plugin has worked for us without any config required, as its default methods matched our API almost perfectly. The $update method though is using the put verb rather than the patch verb, so we're going to need to override that. So on the screen I've opened the item model definition, and what we're going to have to do is add a static method conf, and we're going to let that equal an object. We'll give it a property methods, and we're going to assign an object to that. Here we can now override the setting of our $update method, so we'll make that a property, assign another object, and inside that we can add a property HTTP, assign that an object, and we can now set method to patch instead of the default put. With that done, coming back to the edit item form now, if we now try to change one of the values, change the price to something else and click save, this time it looks like it's worked. And with that, we've now completed this module. So give yourself a pat on the back, and I'll see you in Module 7.